we have Terry Porter, who is going to give us a talk on the Katy Depot Tower.
Can you hear me?
Ooh.
Very nice.
Ooh.
Very nice.
Well, my name is Terry Porter, and I am a lifetime resident of this area. I was born in the old Maud Norton Hospital. My younger brother was born in the new Maud Norton Hospital.
David?
No, Ernie.
Oh,
I was a Brumback. I'm sorry.
no, you're okay, you're okay.
I was a daughter of Mick and Betty Brumback.
Yeah.
And I was filling these ladies in on a little bit of the history of the family. My grandfather, who worked in the tower, it was probably 2 years when I was 9 and 10 years old. I was in and out of that tower because, and by the way, my grandfather's name was Bill French, William French. He was married to Edna Smittle, who was his second wife. My mother's mother passed away when Mother was 14. And so my mother and my uncle came to live with Max and Catherine Sharpneck, who were a brother to Merle, who was my mother. So anyway, I was telling these ladies that my grandfather met my granny at the Old Frisco Cafe that was across the railroad track not too long after she was out of high school. And she was quite a bit younger than he was. And I think there was maybe 4 years, 5 years difference between my mother and my granny. So Granny was a lot of fun. And she was a wonderful granny. And I was also telling the ladies, we didn't call Grandpa, we called him Honey. Because Granny called him Honey. And that's what we heard. My brother, my oldest brother, Dennis, and I lived with my grandparents while my dad was away in the war. So my dad actually didn't see me until I was almost 18 months old. Excuse me. So that's just a brief history. Now, how I came to the tower was my grandfather had a heart attack. And I was the loaned out child. If somebody needed somebody for companionship or company, Terry got to go. So I can remember many a night, my dad's parents were Hazel and Jeff Brumback. And Granddad worked for the state highway department. And I can remember my dad picking me up out of bed when I was very young and taking me to stay with Grandma Brumback because Granddad had been called out because of high water or snow or whatever. And so I was sent to stay with Grandma. Now, I probably didn't weigh 30 pounds soaking wet, but I was there. So anyway, that was a continuation in my younger years. If somebody needed somebody to stay, I stayed. And I learned so much. And I wouldn't take back the time that I had with Honey in the tower for anything, because I was probably as close to him as any grandchild. But anyway, I digress. So I would go to work with Honey, and I had a pallet. If he worked nights, I had a pallet that we laid behind the levers, which he used to switch the, what did they call it?
The Y?
The Y, yes.
Well, there's another name for that.
Well, whatever it is. The Tricross, was that it? I don't remember. At the time, I didn't know. I didn't realize the importance of that, actually. But it was very important. And he was a telegrapher. He worked up and down the Katy line. I think he one time worked in Texas. He worked a great deal in Oklahoma. And then he worked here in the tower. And when he retired, he worked at Spencer Chemical Company. They had trains that came and went and loaded there, and Honey took care of those. So anyway, I would go with him because there was a fear he would get sick. And he was up in this tower. And I can remember my short little legs, that was a long climb. But he would get a message from the train because there were no radios like there are today. This would be early 50s, I believe. And somewhere around 53, 54 probably, because I was probably 9 or 10. And he would get a message on the, I called it the cricket, but from the engine, and he would get the orders where the trains needed to go and where he needed to switch the tracks. And in this depot, there were windows in the front, I remember, that faced the track. There was a desk, and then behind that there was a space probably about as wide as this, maybe a little bit wider. And behind that were a series of levers. And these levers, which he would pull like this, controlled the switching of the tracks. So, and I was an inquisitive thing, so I asked a lot of questions, and I'm glad I did. And he would tell me what he was doing. Now, he would get these orders, and the train would be coming, so he would write out the message. He would go down the tower stairs, and I think maybe in that one picture there might be a picture of the platform he climbed up on for the train to come by. I saw that somewhere. Anyway, the train came by. The engineer would grab the orders, and he had a long pole, and it was like a yoke. And on the end of this yoke, there was a very taut string. There must have been two, because he would stick this message in there. He would climb up on this little platform, and as the train approached, he would hang on, and he would lean out, and the engineer would grab those orders. And I would watch from up above to make sure he was okay. And so I saw him do that numerous times. I wish that I did pick up a little bit of Morse code, not a lot, because it didn't mean that much to me. But he was a very interesting, very diversified person. He loved to hunt and fish, and he loved the railroad. That was his. I'm not sure how old he was when he went to work for the railroad, but I know he must have been fairly young. And he had brothers who also worked for the railroad. I had an Uncle Jim and an Uncle George, and I remember getting in a lot of trouble one time. We got passes to ride the train, and Uncle George lived in Dallas, and he worked in the offices for the railroad. And at that time, there was a man that was over all of the railroads, and I remember his name distinctly. His last name was Damaris. And we were standing at Dallas on the platform of the train station, waiting for Uncle George to come and pick us up. And he was approaching in one of these cars, you know, like they have on the railroad. We called them putt-putt cars, but that's, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, it was a big hubbub in the depot because Damaris was coming through and they were going to get to see him. Well, I'd heard a lot about Damaris, even though I didn't know who he was. I don't think he was well liked, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, he's approaching, and as he comes by, I probably was 7, 8 at this time. I thought, okay, I'll just sew in my innocent little self. He's approaching, and I go, "Hail Damaris! Hail Damaris!" Well, I want to tell you, I got snatched by the back of the neck, And my granny said, I hope nobody knows who you are. I said, what did I do? What did I do? Well, then they explained to me later at Uncle George's dinner table what I had done. And he also reprimanded me, but then he patted me on the back and he said, good girl. So to him, I don't think it was that bad a thing, but that's a memory that I have that's very distinct. I think that's also the trip where my oldest brother, Dennis, got off the train in Durant, Oklahoma, I think it was, which he was not supposed to. A bridge was out, and we were waiting on the train for a bus to take us on. We finished that trip on a bus. So anyway, we're there waiting, and Dennis got off the train. The bus arrived. Dennis had not arrived. I don't think Mother even knew Dennis was off of the train. So we were delayed for quite some time while everybody looked for Dennis, who eventually was found, and there again, I mean, there must have been stories that went up and down the railroad about the Brumback kids. Surely there was. But we had a lot of interesting experiences with the railroad. My dad worked for the section game, and at that time, Honey worked at the Chautauqua Tower. There was also a tower there, and I was in and out of that tower too as a child. So it was a very interesting place. It's a very, if I understand correctly, what I've learned in recent years, there weren't very many of these switches, like these 3 cross switches or whatever there were. Three-way. There was one in Germany, there was one in Pennsylvania, and there was one in Columbus, and there were 2 more, but I can't tell you where those were. So Columbus has an interesting, rich history with the railroad, even though a lot of people don't realize that. And there were crews that would come through, and they would stop and switch trains, and Honey would get the orders that they were going to stop. So they would go across to the Frisco Cafe and get a hamburger or a whatever. Sometimes I got to take the orders across so that the meal would be ready when they got there. So, and I also can remember it was a big deal to me to get to cross the railroad tracks and go get a bottle of pop. Now, many people call it soda, but it was always pop for me. And I loved a grape. And they had it, so I could go across there and get a pop. Honey would give me the money, and I was so important because I got to do that. So that's basically about all I know about the inner workings, only that I know it was important. I know and always knew he had an important job. I know he was dedicated to his job, and the knowledge he must have had. I wish I could remember how many of these levers there were, because there were several, and he pushed in on a part of it and pulled it this way, or he pushed in and he sent it that way. So that's what actually changed those tracks for the trains. And like I say, it was a great experience. I wish that I could go back now and relive a lot of that. Oh my goodness, the questions I would ask. And he was very patient. He was always very patient. And he loved to fish. And I was a chatterbox. I learned early on, if Honey had his line in the water, zip it. Don't say a word. I also got in trouble for that more than once. But he taught me to bait my own hook, take a fish off, and he loved his grandkids. And late in life, he and Granny had a son, Joe, and he was like a brother to us. He was very close in age to our youngest brother, Ernie. And so he grew up with us. And it was a wonderful life. Columbus was a wonderful place to come, and entertainment for us is Daddy would bring us on Saturday night we would park on the square and we would watch the people. That we didn't go to the movies, we didn't have money for that, but we watched the people. And Dad knew everyone almost because, as I was telling the ladies, Dad worked when there was a Hudson station. Do any of you remember the Hudson station that said, okay, Homer would, yes.
Yeah.
And Dad and my Uncle Lewin Thomas worked at that station. When Dad passed away, he worked at the station at the end of Maple Street. He and my youngest brother, Ernie, which they've demolished, which was sad to me. But I guess they're getting a new bank there on that corner. I see a lot of construction, and that's what I understand. So Columbus is growing. It's not a stagnant place. It's a sleepy little town, but it's a wonderful place to have been raised. Do any of you remember the old sale barn? Okay, it was at the end of Maple Street, I believe, where the nursing home is. And my great-grandparents, whom I would go come to town with, would bring me on sale day. And when the old beautiful courthouse was there on the square, they had a drawing. And there was this big drum with all these tickets in it, and people would enter their names, and they would give away money. My fondest memory of that courthouse is they had what to me was a beautiful ladies' room. There were big windows, there was a porch. Many of you probably know Linda Napier. At that time she was Linda Bowen. And Linda and I would climb in and out of that window and sit on the sofa like we were big stuff. But they would play Sousa's March when it came time to draw the tickets out. So it was always stand at attention when they announced who was the winner. I don't remember my grandparents ever winning, but I do remember the sale barn, and there was a little cafe there too, where I would get a nickel hamburger and spend the day with my great-grandparents. So does anybody have any questions?
Now these switches, they actually changed the tracks. They weren't
Yes.
signals that he gave to somebody else. They were
They
actually,
changed the tracks. That was my understanding. That's what these levers did. And I think there's like 2 tracks now? 3? Is there 3? Okay. At that time, I think the Frisco had 2 of the tracks, and the Katy had 1. And they sort of shared the depot and the tower for information. So I wish I could tell you more.
So the levers controlled, it was kind of fixed up with a pipe, mechanical. It had rollers on it. The pipe did, so when they pulled these levers, that it would, change the track, switch it.
Yes, I believe so, Homer. I never got into the intricacies of how it worked. I just knew to me it was important. And I also knew I had a very important job to keep Honey safe.
Yeah,
That's how I didn't know how to use a phone. So, and I was 9 or 10 years old. We didn't have a phone. So I didn't have any idea how to use a phone. So my first lesson, and I remember Granny went up with us, and she taught me how to use the phone, and the police number was written right there by the phone. So if something happened to Honey, I was to call the police. And in my mind, I thought, and I'll cover him with a blanket, because I had my pallet in the back, so I had plenty of blankets. Anybody else?
Me and my friend, I wondered if it was your grandfather that invited us up there, because we was always playing on the railroad track, and stuff. And he invited me and my buddies up there, and we seen all that stuff.
That sounds like something he would do. He was a teacher.
Yeah.
And now, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't get reprimanded for playing on the railroad track. I wasn't allowed to do that, Homer, were you?
We did lots. We even had rock fights, across the
Oh,
road.
yeah.
Yeah. This is guy stuff, you know.
Yeah, that was guy stuff. Well, I'll tell you what, I thought I was one of the guys. I mean, I went through school at Stittville. I actually graduated from school in Stittville. And I had 3 whole people in my class, and one of them was my cousin. So there weren't a lot of girls in our neighborhood. So I learned to go back to the pits, hunt for fossils. We did that a lot, and we'd see who could collect the most fossils, and arrowheads. We'd look for arrowheads. Then one time my brother and I had a BB gun fight. Yeah. As I said, the Brumback kids were notorious. And in that BB gun fight, I lost part of my front tooth. He hit me right in the mouth. And I hit him right in the forehead. I could have put his eye out. He could have damaged me more than breaking my tooth in half. But oh boy, when we went home, it was one of those mother, you just wait till your daddy gets home. It wasn't good. We both, as I remember right, we both got a little hickory tea, and he took our BB guns, and he took them apart, and we never saw them again. So that was a lesson learned, you know. When you're going to do stuff like that, you're going to get caught, because something's going to tell, and a broken tooth and a knot on your head will certainly tell something went on in there. We called them the dumps back behind us. I don't know why, that's just what we always called them. And behind our house, we lived on Highway 7, and at the top of the hill. And behind our house was the NEO Railroad that ran back there, if any of you remember that railroad. It was just a small railroad, and I can't tell you a thing about it, only I knew what time it came by every day. So it was a very rural area. The one thing I remember, my dad would tell people we lived between the Rendezvous and the Red Top. Any of you know where those are?
Those are bars.
Yeah, I know what they were. But that's how you would explain where we lived, and we did. We lived about halfway between the Rendezvous and the Red Top. And when we would go trick-or-treating, we got our best treats at the Red Top and the Rendezvous. So once a year, we would get to go there.
Now, you were in Stepville.
We actually lived at Turk.
I was wondering, you might have, did you go to school with or know the Langerots? Did you shop at their store? And
We shopped at their store. We did not go to school with them. They went to school at Skidmore and Scammon.
Skidmore.
There was a school on 7 that was north of us that was called Skidmore. And I believe that some of them went there, but I think most of them went to Scammon. And then when they had the Catholic school here in town.
St. Rose, yes.
Yes, they went to St. Rose. So, but we did know them because we traded at their store.
Cool.
I've always found the stores interesting. They were like so important to a community, and the thing that just blows me away is they all sold dynamite.
I think that's correct.
You can just go ahead and buy some dynamite.
Yes. My Uncle Jim and Aunt Eva owned a store across the highway from Stittville School. It had belonged to Robinson's prior to that. And Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Eva bought it. Uncle Jimmy traveled on construction, so Aunt Eva ran the store. And they did. They were so important, so very important. They had a meat counter and, you know, everything you needed. We didn't need everything then like we think we need now. It was the basics, and they supplied it. And that was the way with Langerots. They were Lonzos to us.
Yeah.
Lonzo's.
Lonzos. Years later, they became Langerots. I don't know why, but anyway, they've always been Lonzos to me.
Was that the name of one of the grandparents or something?
Well, Charlie and Louise lived right across. You know where the little farmers market is now?
Yeah.
Okay, Charlie and Louise lived in that house, and I think they always went by Lonzo. I never heard them.
That's where Michael is now.
Yes, yes, that's where he is now, yes. And down the street, a little ways from them, down that little country road, was Louise's sister Grace. And she was married to Clovis DeBeauty. And
Okay, I know
yes,
her.
Beauty.
yes,
I knew
uh-huh,
her.
yes,
There's still a DeBeauty living out east of the truck stop at Pittsburgh there. She has a place on the south side there.
Okay.
She lived in Chicopee. She's
Okay. Well, they had a daughter, and I think her name was Shirley, Clovis and Louise. I don't remember. I remember seeing her, but I think that was her name, but I'm not sure. But Clovis and Grace and Charlie and Louise and Jake and Margaret ran that little store. And I believe Jake and Charlie were the butchers. And they butchered in the basement. And you could get fresh meat there. And we bought feed there, back in the back, with the floured feed sacks. When they would get those in, we would get to go and pick, you know.
Pattern.
Yes, get a pattern, and Granny made our clothes out of those. And we might not pick it up right then, but they would put back so we'd have enough material for, and she made shirts for my brothers. So we utilized that material. I don't know why they started doing that, making the flowered material. Maybe somebody would know, because the early feed that I
Well,
remember us getting.
Good quality fabric was hard to find back
Yes.
in the day, and they found that the women had an interest in the feed sacks, so they would print the feed sack fabric with calico print, so that the women who were wanting to sew could come in and pick out, say, like, I need 4 bags of flour because I need enough fabric to make my 3 girls a dress. And it was an invention of the feed mills.
Of the needing, and there was a need.
There was a need for the fabric, yes.
One of my favorite dresses that Granny made was, I had a little light blue dress, and it had little red rosebuds, and she made a little Peter Pan collar around it, and I had little red buttons down the front. And that was one of my favorite dresses, that I wish I had it today. It was lovely, and I wore it to school. She made all of our clothes, and that's
Not
what
very
we wore
many
to
people.
school.
Not very many people do that anymore, where they buy the patterns. You'd buy these patterns and you cut them out to the patterns. They
Right.
still have them. I'm sure there's still a few people that know how to do it, but that used to be a regular thing.
If you go to purchase a pattern today, the average pattern costs anywhere from $15 to $18.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
And then by the time you buy
The material.
the fabric
Mhm.
for anywhere from $12 to $20 a yard, it's cheaper to go purchase the garment already made.
Right. I think home sewing is making a comeback because of so many people are into vintage things now. So I see, if you ladies ever go to Joann's, maybe you gentlemen do too, they have an area in the middle of the store that is patterns and fabric, and you're exactly right. I mean, it's so expensive. My granddaughter, who lives in Michigan, we saw her recently, and she's learning to crochet. And that's something that the younger people are taking up now. And she had made this most darling little brown teddy bear that was, I said, how long did that take you? And she said, forever. But she done a really, really good job. And so my other granddaughter says, can you make a cat? And she said, I'd have to have a pattern. So I went to Joann's, and I looked for a pattern for a cat. No, but they had unicorns, and they had dinosaurs, and they had pigs, and they had lambs. And so anyway, I ended up buying her a packet that had a lot of different patterns in it for beginners. But it's something that the young people are doing today that I just think is wonderful, because it's a lost art in many areas.
Whenever you wish.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, that was very interesting.
Okay, if we have nothing else to discuss, meeting adjourned.